Throughout American history, several presidents have died while serving in office. It's a somber and often startling chapter in the story of our nation's leadership. These moments, whether brought on by illness or the violent act of an assassin, represent a profound disruption not just to the executive branch, but to the entire country. The presidency is more than just a job. It's a symbol of stability and continuity. When that continuity is broken, it forces a reckoning, a moment of national grief, and a sudden, often unprepared transfer of power. Their deaths often change the course of the nation. These are not mere footnotes in our history books. They are pivotal events that reshaped political landscapes, altered policy directions, and tested the very resilience of our democratic institutions. The unexpected loss of a commander-in-chief sends ripples through every level of government and society, leaving behind a legacy defined as much by what they accomplished as by the abrupt and tragic end of their time in office. Tonight, we're going to take a closer look at these 8 men. We'll examine the circumstances of their deaths, from the battlefields of personal health to the shocking final moments of assassination. We'll explore the immediate aftermath and the lasting impact these events had on the country they were elected to lead. This is a story of leadership, loss, and the enduring strength of a nation forced to confront the unthinkable. It's about keeping them honest, even in their final chapters. Our story begins with William Henry Harrison, the 9th President of the United States. His inauguration in March of 1841 was a spectacle of defiance. Determined to project an image of a rugged frontiersman, the 68-year-old Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address in American history, a speech lasting nearly 2 hours, on a bitterly cold and wet day, without a coat or gloves. It was a decision rooted in political theater, an attempt to counter the narrative that he was too old and frail for the demanding office he had just won. But it was a decision that would have devastating consequences. Just weeks later, Harrison fell ill. His doctors at the time diagnosed him with pneumonia, a direct result, they believed, of his prolonged exposure to the harsh elements on Inauguration Day. For days, the nation held its breath as his condition worsened. His brief presidency, filled with the promise of his Tippecanoe and Tyler II campaign, was consumed by a battle for his own life. On April 4, 1841, just 31 days after taking the oath of office, William Henry Harrison died, becoming the first U.S. president to die in office and serving the shortest term in the nation's history. His death triggered the first-ever constitutional crisis over presidential succession. Less than a decade later, the nation would face a similar tragedy with its 12th president, Zachary Taylor. A career military officer and a hero of the Mexican-American War, Taylor, known as Old Rough and Ready, was a political outsider who took office in 1849. His presidency was immediately thrust into the heated debate over slavery's expansion into the new territories acquired from Mexico. Taylor, a slaveholder himself but a staunch nationalist, resisted the extension of slavery, a position that put him at odds with powerful Southern interests and members of his own Whig Party. On a sweltering 4th of July in 1850, after attending a long ceremony at the Washington Monument, Taylor reportedly consumed a large quantity of iced milk and raw cherries. That evening he fell violently ill with severe stomach cramps. His doctors diagnosed him with cholera morbus, a term used then for acute gastroenteritis. For 5 days he suffered immensely. On July 9, 1850, after just 16 months in office, Zachary Taylor died. His sudden death paved the way for his vice president, Millard Fillmore, who supported the Compromise of 1850, a series of bills that Taylor had vehemently opposed. Taylor's death fundamentally altered the nation's path toward the Civil War. Perhaps no presidential death has left a deeper scar on the American psyche than that of Abraham Lincoln. He was the man who guided the nation through its darkest hour, the Civil War. By April 1865, the war was finally drawing to a close. General Robert E. Lee had surrendered his Confederate army just days earlier, and a sense of relief and cautious optimism was beginning to spread across the weary nation. Lincoln was already looking ahead, speaking of a reconstruction with malice toward none, with charity for all, a vision of healing a deeply divided country. On the evening of Good Friday, April 14, 1865, the President and First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln sought a moment of respite at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. During the third act of the play, our American cousin, John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and a fervent Confederate sympathizer, slipped into the presidential box. He fired a single shot from a small Derringer into the back of Lincoln's head. The president slumped forward, mortally wounded. He was carried across the street to a boarding house where he lingered through the night, never regaining consciousness. At 7:22 the next morning, Abraham Lincoln died. His assassination sent a shockwave of grief across the Union and plunged the future of Reconstruction into uncertainty. In 1881, the nation was once again confronted with the assassination of its leader. James A. Garfield, a brilliant scholar and Civil War general, had been in office for less than 4 months. His brief presidency was already mired in a bitter political fight over civil service reform, a battle against the so-called spoils system, where government jobs were handed out as political favors. Garfield was determined to build a government based on merit, not patronage, which, created powerful enemies within his own Republican Party. On July 2, 1881, as he was walking through a Washington, D.C. railroad station on his way to a summer vacation, Garfield was shot twice by a disgruntled and mentally unstable office seeker named Charles Guiteau. One bullet grazed his arm, the other lodged behind his pancreas. For the next 79 days, the president's life hung in the balance. In a tragic turn of medical irony, it wasn't the bullet that proved fatal. It was the infection introduced by numerous doctors probing the wound with unsterilized fingers and instruments in a desperate and misguided attempt to locate the projectile. Garfield's long public suffering ended on September 19, 1881. His death, however, galvanized the nation, and the public outcry led directly to the passage of the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, the very cause he had championed. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the United States was emerging as a global power under President William McKinley. Having led the nation to victory in the Spanish-American War and presiding over a period of economic prosperity, McKinley was re-elected to a second term in 1900. He was a popular president, known for his calm demeanor and his signature red carnation, which he often gave away as a sign of goodwill. His presidency, really represented an era of confidence and expansionism. In September 1901, McKinley was attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. On September 6th, while greeting the public in a receiving line at the Temple of Music, a young anarchist named Leon Czolgosz approached him. Czolgosz's hand was wrapped in a handkerchief concealing a revolver. As McKinley reached to shake his hand, Czolgosz fired 2 shots at close range. One bullet was deflected by a button, but the other tore through the president's stomach. Initially, McKinley seemed to be recovering, but gangrene set in around the wound. 8 days later, on September 14, 1901, William McKinley died, making his dynamic Vice President Theodore Roosevelt the youngest president in the nation's history. The Roaring Twenties brought a desire for peace and prosperity after the turmoil of World War I. Warren G. Harding was the man who promised a return to normalcy. Elected in a landslide in 1920, his administration was a mix of notable achievements, like the creation of the Bureau of the Budget, and brewing scandals, most famously the Teapot Dome affair, which was yet to break publicly. Harding himself was a genial, well-liked man, though often seen as overwhelmed by the presidency. In the summer of 1923, Harding embarked on an ambitious cross-country voyage of understanding, a tour to connect with citizens and promote his policies. The trip was grueling, spanning thousands of miles by train and ship, all the way to the territory of Alaska, a first for a sitting president. On the return journey while in San Francisco, Harding suddenly fell ill. His doctors initially diagnosed him with food poisoning, then pneumonia. On the evening of August 2, 1923, while his wife was reading to him in their hotel suite, the president shuddered and died. The official cause was a cerebral hemorrhage, or what we would today call a stroke, likely brought on by a heart attack. His sudden death spared him from the full political fallout of the scandals that would soon engulf his administration. No president served longer than Franklin D. Roosevelt, and arguably, no president faced a greater convergence of crises. He guided the nation through the Great Depression with his New Deal policies, and then led the Allied powers through the darkest days of World War II. Elected to an unprecedented 4 terms, FDR's voice on his fireside chats became a source of comfort and strength for millions of Americans. His steadfast leadership reshaped the role of the federal government and the presidency itself. By early 1945, however, the immense strain of more than a dozen years in office, compounded by his paralysis from polio, had taken a severe toll. Though the war in Europe was nearing its end, Roosevelt was visibly frail and exhausted. His doctors noted his dangerously high blood pressure and declining health, but the full extent of his condition was kept from the public. In April, he traveled to his retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia, to rest. On the afternoon of April 12, 1945, while sitting for a portrait, he suddenly complained of a terrific pain in the back of my head and collapsed. He had suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Franklin D. Roosevelt died just hours later, never seeing the final victory he had worked so tirelessly to achieve. The early 1960s were a time of new frontiers, of youthful energy and bold aspirations, all embodied by President John F. Kennedy. His presidency, which he called Camelot, was marked by the Cold War's highest tensions, including the Cuban Missile Crisis, the creation of the Peace Corps, and the ambitious goal of landing a man on the moon. He and his family brought a sense of glamour and vigor to the White House that captivated the nation and the world. His call to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country inspired a generation. In November 1963, with an eye toward the upcoming 1964 election, Kennedy traveled to Texas to mend political fences within the state's Democratic Party. On November 22, as his motorcade drove through Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas, shots rang out. The president was struck in the head and neck. The open-top limousine sped to Parkland Memorial Hospital. But the wound was catastrophic. John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead a short time later. The assassination, captured on film, became one of the most shocking and endlessly analyzed moments in modern history. The death of the vibrant young president plunged a hopeful nation into a state of profound shock and mourning, a collective trauma that still echoes today. These 8 presidents left a lasting impact on the nation, and their untimely deaths shaped American history. From William Henry Harrison's 31-day term that set the first precedent for succession, to the assassination of John F. Kennedy that shattered a nation's innocence, each death created a vacuum of power and a moment of profound uncertainty. They are stories of what was and of what might have been. The deaths of Lincoln and Garfield galvanized major reforms, while the loss of Taylor and Roosevelt altered the course of national policy at critical junctures. These events are more than historical facts. They are stark reminders of the fragility of life and the resilience of our democracy. In each instance, the Constitution held. A vice president stepped forward, the government continued to function, and the nation, though grieving, endured. The peaceful transfer of power, even under the most tragic and violent circumstances, has remained a cornerstone of the American experiment. It's a testament to the strength of the institutions our leaders serve, institutions designed to outlast any single individual. The legacies of these 8 men are forever intertwined with the suddenness of their departures. They serve as solemn markers in our nation's timeline, forcing us to reflect on the immense pressures of the presidency and the profound impact one leader can have. Their stories are a vital part of our shared history, reminding us that the course of a nation can change in an instant, with a fever, a stroke, or the pull of a trigger. Thank you for watching.